No U.S. president is a king and no commander-in-chief should have absolute power. The separation of those powers is a cornerstone of our Constitution. And today, the U.S. Senate signaled they will vote against the president's national emergency to fund the wall based on those all-important constitutional principles. But in the end, President Trump may still get his funding because he can veto their decision. As you know, President Trump has been trying to secure wall funding ever since the late 1800s, claiming drugs and criminals have been pouring into our country through the porous southern border. But after the government shut down, the president declared a national emergency because House Democrats kept cutting the money. The House already voted down the national emergency, but on the Senate side, 4 Republicans have now defected, including Tom Tillis, Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and there he is from plucky Kentucky, Senator Rand Paul. This afternoon, Senator Paul explained why. Watch.
Yeah, I spoke to the president last night, and we had a good discussion. He says he understands where I'm coming from. I must have said 1,000 times that President Obama was acting like a king. I feel very strongly about this. I feel very strongly about the separation of powers. I did under President Obama, and I have exactly the same feeling now. And to me, it isn't even about immigration. It isn't about a Republican or a Democrat president. It's about Congress versus the president and where the power should be distributed.
Ooh, house of cards. So now what? Well, after the Senate votes it down, the president will likely veto that decision. And then it goes back to Congress, where 2/3 of lawmakers are required to override the veto. And according to political analysts, the math, well, it's just not there. So will the president get his way, and will he eventually claim victory on the wall? Joining me now, Washington Examiner commentary editor and author of the brand new book that you must get immediately, A Perfect Easter Present, Alienated America. Tim Carney, its author, is here. Timothy P. Carney, welcome back.
Thank you, Kennedy.
So let's discuss this. Did Rand Paul make the right decision? And were the other senatorial Republican decisions rooted in the same set of principles?
I'm not in the position of trying to read Lisa Murkowski's mind, but Rand Paul is exactly right. The Constitution makes it clear that spending power is vested in Congress. The president has been given some emergency powers, given them by Congress, but to spend money that Congress has explicitly said they don't want to spend money is not one of those powers. And so, while you're right that the Republicans probably will not enough of them will join to override the president's veto, they ought to, because Republicans are supposed to be the ones who care about the Constitution.
And limited government.
And limited government,
keeping,
yes.
You know, checks and balances where they are necessary.
And it's even a separate issue from the wall. I think we have a problem at the border, but emergency powers are for something like where Congress can't get its act together in time. If if there's something where the president needs to act now because a hurricane just hit and they can't get Congress, they can't get enough people there until Monday, that's what these emergency powers are for. They're not for, I think this is a problem and the elected representatives of the people disagree, so I'm going to override them.
Here's the nice thing about it, though, because it can be so easily overridden and the funds can be so easily allocated. Maybe they will put stopgap measures in there for the future so another president can't do this. And I think that's why these 4 senators, 4 so far, are wise to bet the insurance because the dealer is showing an ace.
Well, and that what they're going to have to do, though, is stick some measure in a law that the president has to pass, because right now they are in a position where he's not asking for congressional approval. Congress needs to pass a bill into law to block him. So, yes, what I'm hoping is that the Democrats are now seeing that maybe the President of the United States has a little too much power and we ought to rein that in. That would be a positive development.
And it's not just this president, and that's a really important thing to point out. It was President Obama, it was President Bush, it was President Clinton, and there have been a series of power concentrations. I mean, I guess you could argue since the Nixon administration. And that's why you've seen so many recycled players just figuring out how to do a better and better job of taking that power and securing it in the executive branch. And that's not okay. And that's not how Washington should function. And it's certainly not how Congress should function. Democrats were happy to give away a lot of that congressional power when President Obama was in office. But now all of a sudden it's a big problem.
And we're hoping, as they say in media, we're hoping there's a strange new respect for the separation of power and for federalism and for limiting the executive power. That would be a positive outcome of this little power play by President Trump.
Do you think there is a possibility he will not override the veto?
The only way that could happen.
Do you think? I take that back. I was
that
putting
he will not
carts and
veto
horses
the
in opposite ends of the field. Do you think he will not veto the law? Exactly.
What it would take would be Congress coming to him with something in between. And this would sort of be the art of the deal, right? Where Congress says, look, we don't want this ugly fight to happen, so why don't we spend some money, a little more on the border, and you don't try this little thing so we don't have to go to court. That would be the way sort of a functional Congress president thing would work. Right now, the Democrats would rather the fight. They would rather the Supreme Court case. But yes, it is very
they
possible.
Have to, and I'm so glad you brought that up, because later in the show, we'll talk about, this crisis in our democracy. And it may not be so based on the facts and the data, but Democrats really want to make it seem so. And I think you're absolutely right. Instead of sitting down and saying, OK, how can we avoid all this that makes us all wildly unpopular, they're going to force it to the courts just to prove a point.
No, I think that's exactly right, because right now the definition of the Democratic Party is opposing Donald Trump, just like, unfortunately, the definition of the Republican Party is supporting Donald Trump. I don't think either of those are very healthy positions, very healthy situations to be in.
Well, I toast to your health, Tim Carney, and I thank you very much for being here this beautiful Monday evening.
Thank you.